I'll go ahead and call to order the Thursday, August 12, 2021 meeting of the Clive City Council. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Cirksena.
Here.
Councilmember Klein.
Here.
Edwards.
Here.
McCoy.
Here.
Judkins.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Nice to see everybody present and accounted for. Welcome all. If you would be so kind to stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you. Next item is approval of the agenda. I'm not aware of any changes.
Move approval. Second.
John, seconded by Eric. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Ted, I trust that's an aye from you.
Yep, I said aye. Sorry.
Okay, good. Sorry, I couldn't hear you. Good. Agenda is approved. Thank you. Next item is citizens presentation. This is where anyone that is either in the chambers with us or on virtually would like to address the council on an item that is not on the agenda. Is there anybody here to do that? If you're on virtual, please make yourself known to Pete so we can plug in.
Yeah, Mayor, at this time, there's only staff that's participating
Okay.
virtually and Councilman Weaver.
Okay. Seeing none, we'll move to consent items.
Move the resolution. Second.
Moved by John, seconded by Eric. Any discussion? Seeing none, will the council please vote? Passes 5-0. Thank you. Okay, now we'll move to action items. And our first action item is regarding cybersecurity incident response plan. And Joyce is going to take us through that. Joyce?
Yeah, I'm sharing this with Dennis, our IT manager. We worked on this project for, oh my goodness, months. Not quite a year, since strategic planning last year. So it was one of our initiatives, and we worked through ICAP. We were fortunate enough to realize through them that we had resources. They have a risk manager. Her name is Colette Cryer. So we were able to use her as a resource, and she provided us with all of the templates and examples of policies that we should be developing to put into part of this plan. She was a great resource, and Dennis will speak to a little bit more. He worked with her more on the IT side because she came and actually did a risk management audit of every computer that we have and our digital equipment. So it was very thorough. So what you have before you is the putting it all together for our incident response plan. One of the other pieces to it is that we do have coverage through ICAP, through our policy. We have some liability coverage through there, which is a $15 million liability coverage. And then we have $250,000, which would cover us with assistance if we were to experience a breach. But in our research and everything we had learned, it's like that is a drop in the bucket if we would have anything such as that. So back in the fall, actually, I think it was August of last year, we purchased an additional policy that would work in tandem with that through Chubb, which was an additional cost in addition to our ICAP coverage. And that's where, if we experience something like that, they would step in, because there are so many rules or regulations and disclosure requirements if you were to experience one that they would pick us up and get us through that. So I think that coverage is very valuable. Actually, Matthew just worked through some renewal paperwork, which was kind of a nightmare, I think, but it's difficult, difficult. But anyway, so as you can see, we have our incident response plan. It lines out the team, and Dennis can speak to these new policies. Some of them were already in place. Our email policy and our internet acceptable use policies are part of our personnel manual right now. So they have been updated. And then Dennis came on with another aspect of it, which are these technology standard policies, which are appendix to the program. So happy to answer any questions you have, and Dennis can chime in and speak to his technical expertise that he worked on with us. So.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Joyce. Can you hear me okay?
Very great. Thank you.
Okay. And I want to just say that the part A part of this action item was actually going to be part of the incident response plan. But as Joyce and I were kind of working through it, I felt that we needed to kind of pull out the technology policies part of it and then just refer to it in the incident response plan. I think going forward, the technology policies will give us a framework for us to add other things as we go down the road. We can add more things to the remote work policy. We'll be able to add some things regarding connections to the cloud for certain resources that we use. So there's a lot we can do and add to this, and we'll just build on it, and it'll be a nice framework going forward. Kind of felt this set of policies that you see in these chapters were kind of the most important ones to tackle first regarding the data backup, password protection, disposal of technology. Of course, remote access policy is real important right now. And then workstation security policy, which we have things we've been doing in place on the workstation security, but this kind of just more formalizes it. And then as we were going through it, we also thought we should probably come up with acceptable use policy for our technology consultants. So this will be a chapter that we provide to them as part of the work that they do for us in the city. Then there's also some appendixes in this policy, just regarding some acronyms, glossary of terms. There's guidelines for the password construction. And then we also refer to the email and internet acceptable use policies, which are part of the personnel policy manual. So that's kind of what that is. If you've got any questions regarding the technology policy, I'd be happy to answer those.
Questions, council? Eric, go ahead.
Dennis, as you know, most of the malware blackmailing systems out there, the ask is, $5 to $10 million to provide those keys to unlock the hardware right there in Bitcoin right there. How confident are you in the measures here? Do you think we need anything more? Most of these malware incursions occur through remote workstations, but do you feel like this is a robust system, and do we need to continue adding and layering on it over the years?
We have a lot of good, robust systems in place now. Early, I can't remember what year it was anymore. Everything's a fog. We put in the Sentinel-1 endpoint protection system right after the West Des Moines incident. That's been very good. We do get alerts when suspicious activity happens on those endpoints, and that includes workstations, servers. Also, when we move the email to the cloud, we put in a new email filtering system, and it's very good at catching those phishing emails, which in most cases, malware is going to come through an email, launch a program, which should be detected either with our current malware protection on the endpoints or be detected with the Sentinel-1. So I feel that we're very protected. We do monitor the firewall. We do get alerts on the firewall. So we're in a much better position than the city was 3 years ago when some of these things had, I don't want to say were ignored, but needed a lot of improvement. So I think we've made some good investments in technologies to better our position with that.
Michael.
And then
recently ICAP has been going around and they sent out that questionnaire, right? Quite lengthy questionnaire. Does this cover a good share? I mean, we're never going to cover that entire, I don't even know how many pages that thing was, but
I know.
right? Yeah. I mean, we got it too, right? I mean, it's daunting,
Yes.
but does that get us in a pretty good position with ICAP?
Well, I would hope so. I mean, they just keep enhancing the coverage that they offer to us every year, which I'm guessing that this is part of it. They're beefing up
Yeah,
the coverage on that piece.
and the requirements.
In addition to what we have with the Chubb policy, will help on the back end
Okay.
if we ever experience one. So I feel like
But they're making us meet hurdles from, you know, bars that say you've got to do this to, well, they haven't said or else what yet, but.
that Colette is an amazing person. She's got a
Yeah,
lot of,
I think there's a lot of help, assistance back there. So I'm glad you guys,
yeah. So it really virtually cost us nothing except Dennis's time and mine,
yeah,
plus the Chubb policy, but I think that's value added.
yeah.
I think we need it.
I think what I would add too, this is a big piece of this, and I know Dennis and Joyce have kind of laid this out and started talking about it, is the training that comes after what hopefully you adopt here tonight with the staff. And one piece of that is also going to be you folks. And I'm going to be the bearer of bad news because I know how this is going to probably be received. But one of the big things that we've been told that we should stop is forwarding of emails to other email addresses. I know that's typically how some communications can happen. And so what I want to say from our perspective is whatever the council needs in terms of technology, support from staff, if we need to get any new technology for you, but at a point later this year, we're going to want to sit down with each one of you and talk through how can we set this up in a way where we can eliminate any email forwarding that may exist, because that is something that was a high recommendation of what we should stop doing in our system. But so I just want to say that now on behalf of Joyce and Dennis, that I know that that's going to be a challenge, but we want to work with you and make sure we're providing whatever resources we can provide to make that as seamless as possible on any of your devices, or however we need to do that and support you in that.
That's very nice, Matt.
I know. I know it's not going to probably apply as much to you, but.
Other questions, Council?
Move the resolution approving standard technology policy, chapters 1 through 7.
Second.
Moved by Eric, seconded by John. Further discussion?
Mayor, I did have a question.
Go ahead, Ted.
So in the incident response classification matrix, on the level 3 incident, the most severe, should we not have someone like the mayor identified in the response section? It seems to me the mayor should be plugged into that from the very beginning. If it's something that's at that level of a level 3.
It's a reasonable thought. I appreciate that. I thought that we should put Councilmember Weaver's name on it. That's a good question.
We can add that easily.
Yeah, we can definitely add that. And as you'll know, and probably even below that level 3, I'm advising you all in those situations. So, but that's something we definitely can add to have the chief elected official also on there, as well as myself.
That's kind of debatable, but certainly at a level 3, I would think that would merit it.
Right.
Dennis,
are you okay with that?
Yeah, I'm fine. We can definitely add that to the contact list.
Any other, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any other discussion?
With that amendment,
Friendly amendment, yes.
Okay, seeing nothing further, will the council please vote? Passes 5-0.
Move the resolution approving cybersecurity incident response plan.
second.
Moved by Eric, seconded by John. Further discussion? Seeing none, will the council please vote? And that passes 5-0. Thank you, Joyce and Dennis.
Thank you.
Okay, action item number 2 is a resolution approving a contract amendment for professional services with the Smith Group, development of Greenbelt Landing, site plan and construction plans in the amount of $234,300. Richard.
Thank you. Tonight you have before you a contract amendment that will take the Smith Group through completion of design development and permitting for all of the Greenbelt Landing project, as well as completion of the construction drawing and bidding for phase 1. This was done based on the guidance we received from council about how you wanted to break up the project and how we had funding and we were able to get grants and private donations for this. So we believe this is in line with a typical design and construction project. The total phase 1 construction drawings are about 9 to 10%. And then we have a little bit of extra money that covers the design development and permitting for the entire project. One thing also that we've done as part of this is we allocated a couple $1,000s where they are going to take all the potential donation opportunities as well as some of the images and make the case for Greenbelt Landing in a very nice, glossy production that we can take out and anyone can take out to people that are potential donors for this project. So we're very excited about that as well and think that's a good addition to this contract as well. Be happy to take any questions that the council might have.
Questions, council?
I move the resolution.
Second.
It's moved by John, seconded by Susan. Any further discussion? Seeing none, will the council please vote? That passes 5-0. Thank you, Richard. Okay, item number 3 is a motion to approve settlement and release. Barron claim, Matt.
Staff and legal counsel would recommend your approval of the settlement and release to resolve this claim. Happy to answer any questions.
So move.
Second.
It's moved by John, seconded by Eric. Is there further discussion?
Yes, is this something from which I should, which is okay? I will be abstaining, Your Honor.
Thank you, Susan. Any other discussion or questions?
Mr. Mayor, I'll be voting no on this based off our previous conversations.
So noted. Any further discussion? Seeing none, will the council please vote? And that passes with a majority of 3 votes, 1 abstention, and 1 no vote. Okay, thank you. Okay, now probably to the meatier discussion item this evening is the Water Resources Master Plan. This is the vision, operations, and maintenance and incentive programs piece of the plan. And Pete, you're going to take us through it.
Thank you, Your Honor. So we're pleased tonight to have Stephanie Fleckenstein from our partners at HDR to present our next set of questions around the Water Resources Master Plan. This is now the 4th time I believe we've been together to tackle some of these intertwined interdependent questions when it comes to water resources in the city of Clive. Give me one moment. I'm going to go ahead and give this machine the ability to share its screen. One moment. So I'll start by taking everybody through these the first questions that we're going to consider this evening, and then I'll turn it over to Stephanie. Great. Okay, so this first slide is one that you've seen before. It shows us where we are in the larger process of developing our plan. We're still on track to present for your approval later this fall, the final plan, and also the dashboard that we'll put together to track key performance indicators and the community education portal and other assets we're creating so that we can continue to bring the community along with these important issues around water resources. Our discussion topics for this evening, first, the vision document. I printed out a version of the first 6 pages of that document for you, so you have it at your hands if you'd like to get into more detail. Those first 6 pages really articulate the core values, the core pillars that we believe the rest of the logic of water resources in Clive could stand on with your approval. That is an ambitious set of proposals, though, in the vision document. It does imply that there will be future increased spending on operations and maintenance, capital, and in other areas potentially as well. As an example of what that could look like tonight, we've provided an example of what improved inspections and repair of existing infrastructure, what that could look like if we decide to adopt this type of aggressive approach. Finally, tonight, we want to talk about incentive program options. I know this has been something very important to many of you. It's closely related to the larger question of how we work with private property owners who have BMPs on their property, including neighborhood associations as well. So we look forward to a robust conversation. We've presented what we think are some good possibilities for how we might support those types of groups and also other individual property owners in ways that advance key priorities for the water resources goals, key water resources goals for the city. Any questions about our discussion topics this evening?
Before you proceed, for those who might be listening, would you define O&M and BMP for them, please?
Of course, O&M is operating and maintenance, operations and maintenance, and BMP is kind of an unfortunate acronym because a lot of times you'll see it as best management practice. That's what it means when we're talking about water resources as well, or stormwater in particular. But it is a sort of an ill-fitting term because BMP can take a lot of different shapes when we're talking about stormwater. That can be your detention, that can be your retention, that can be some facilities that actually infiltrate water into the ground. I'm missing 1,000 other ways that we can define a BMP. You're doing great. All right. I'm actually going to not make more mistakes here and actually pass it over to Stephanie so she can take us through the rest of the presentation.
Thank you.
Yep.
Stephanie, welcome.
Thank you. I think that was a pretty good description of what a BMP is. In your system within the city of Clive, those examples all take place. There are also rain gardens, other vegetated areas, but in general, it is a facility intended to capture or convey stormwater, generally on the surface, but sometimes also below grade in parking facilities as well. But usually pretty small contained vessel for stormwater. And I'll keep going.
You got all that?
Great. Thank you. So I'd like to walk through the 6 pillars that are spelled out pretty well in greater detail in the packet that you have there in that longer document. The first is the Clive Greenbelt continues to be a distinct part of the community's future by adapting and mitigating the upstream effects of the altered hydrologic landscape within the watershed. The piece that I'd like to highlight there is to continue to protect the Greenbelt. We are expecting greater changes, particularly upstream, and know that those have made significant impact already, but as those continue to change and the rest of the watershed continues to evolve and change, that we will also need to be reflective of those changes and to be able to protect the asset that you guys have. That's the first. I'll keep going then to the second. The second is Clive practices a proactive approach towards regulatory compliance, watershed collaboration, and conservation leadership. This one really highlights first meeting the required needs of the way the system performs and the way that we're investing in particularly the MS4 program, but as well as those opportunities for greater collaboration within the other stakeholders within Walnut Creek, and also being that an early adopter and active participant within the city as well. The final one on this slide is Clive takes intelligent, cost-effective action to become flood resilient through the implementation of nature-based solution to the maximum extent practicable.
This point here is designed to really formalize the position the council has taken in the past that the types of structural flood protection that we've seen in many other places, we just don't believe that's the right application for most Clive neighborhoods. Conditions might change in the future. The price tag for that kind of work is very expensive. The price tag for any of this is expensive. But those nature-based processes, when you can set up the green belt really to convey water effectively in most situations, knowing that there will be situations when it completely overwhelms the green belt, that's our best approach to mitigating flood risk and also maintaining the green belt as an asset to continue to develop around and lift up as one of the core identities of our city.
The fourth pillar is all property owners and residents are actively involved in the stewardship of Clive's natural and water resources.
I want to give Doug Olendijk credit really for all of these, but on this point in particular, Doug has been very, very persuasive to me personally, and I hope also to all of you. This doesn't work if the city does it by itself. There's too much green space that's not owned by the city in this watershed for us to be able to manage all of that with just the places that we control. It's going to take everybody using that green space and all those other facilities to catch this wall of water that's coming at us now and in our future as well.
The fifth is all Clive residents can safely enjoy and benefit from Clive's water resources. This one drives towards the access and amenities on public property, as well as the preservation of the green belt. 6 is Clive's water resource utility provides valued services that are reliable, financially sustainable, and fair, while maintaining flexibility to address future regulatory compliance and changing climate realities. And this one really dives into the operation and maintenance program, or otherwise, how is the level of service that the stormwater system is providing and across the full city.
Your Honor, I have a question.
Go ahead.
I was waiting to see all 6 pillars, but
Sure.
I'm a little bit concerned about pillar number 3, which talks about prioritizing the natural implementation. I think that maybe could be massaged a little bit to indicate that that's a priority, but that we will use structural intervention as needed, because we do. And I think we will continue to do that. So just to clarify, so it doesn't seem restrictive.
Well received. We're happy to make that amendment.
I would, and maybe we'll get to this later on, but as it relates to pillar 2 and 4, because I think they're kind of related, and I'm going to tie it back to new developments, detention facilities, really our direction that that we want to take those back on as the city to manage those, manage them, because these homeowners associations don't know how to do it. It's too technical, and in some cases they're very, very big and not set up correctly. Could you go back to number 2 for me, please?
Sure.
So this is the regulatory compliance, collaboration, conservation leadership. I think that kind of ties in here. But I want to make sure we're just not missing the mark on, this is a great plan. It's a great start. It's a big undertaking and a significant effort. But I want to make sure that we're not getting too caught up in the structure of our utility rates and fees. Just from a straight across perspective. And what I mean by that is that as we go back to these developments and kind of these private facilities that are set up and have been set up basically on, with old BMPs, because we're learning weekly on this area. In some cases, they haven't been set up very well. The one that I live in, my HOA particularly, is an example of one of those. I think another example is in Woodlands Reserve, based on how that is set up, because you have a much larger district contributing to the asset, and only a few people are paying for the asset. Country Club, however, is a very, very complex animal with multiple associations within that group to maintain that very, very large facility. And, you know, and I take my hat off to leadership and our group back then who were able to set that up in such a way that really is viable today. How long will it be viable? Don't know. But I think we have to look at not just our own rates as, you know, for ERUs that, you know, that we charge for to help us manage stormwater on public property. We also have to step beyond that to help manage these private facilities, continuing those, you know, those HOAs that contribute every year to those, because we can't come in with all that new funding. But if we're going to take and manage those facilities, we need to make sure that we've got that, I think, firmly at hand. And I don't want to miss the mark on that. And if I'm getting ahead, just let me know. But I wanted to get that out at the start, because number 4, if you go back to number 4, please. You know, this is the stewardship with all property owners and residents that are actively involved in stewardship. And it goes back to the old, you know, I continue to learn, but, you know, the old drainage districts that were set up to make sure that every contributor to the drainage area is just contributing. So I think we got to make sure that we understand that. Now, that's a heavy lift. And maybe we're not ready for that yet, but I think we're going to need to be at some point. Anyway, that's what I have, at least for now. Others, Mike?
No, hey, the devil's is in the details on this one, right? Y'all know my opinion on it at the surface. We are ahead of the cart here when it comes to this new shared model come lately, right? And so again, devil's in the detail. I'll certainly be open to listen. On the surface, I don't like anything that this smells like or where we're headed when it comes to the shared of old facilities and that type of thing, right? So again, I'd be open to it. But what I'm hearing is maybe something different, right? Than what I would prefer. I mean, I think we can put our money towards certainly Walnut Creek and some of that mitigation and some of that flood and, you know, stormwater fees and all that. But to start adding on fees for neighbors that were never in the detention center or an HOA now, boy, that would be a very heavy lift to get me to go that way, you know. But again, new fees for new management, I'm all in.
Yeah, talking about going forward.
Yeah. And we've done that, right? And reluctantly me to say.
I think we're trying to. We're trying to get our mind around it.
Right. And we've taken on some stormwater ponds with some fishing opportunities out west and as a council with some of those new developments. But I think some kind of going back and reaching back to is a touchy one.
Well, that's pretty tough to do. And that's why I think when we get to the end, when we get to the grant program and the community programming, that can help make a difference there. Can't do it all at one time.
Sure.
Yeah. Excellent. Other questions at this point? Otherwise, we can have Stephanie keep going.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Council.
In response to the 6 pillars that we just shared, I'd welcome your feedback. Do the pillars in the draft report reflect the water resources future that we want to achieve, and the principles that could shape the water resources utility?
I think so. With Susan's amendment to that she'd offered on that, I'm more comfortable with that.
Okay. And do they provide clarity on the drivers for future endeavors?
Clarity will have to be worked out over time.
Sure.
Look at everything I just spouted off. You know, that's going to come probably later on. But I think to answer the question, these are reasonable starting points for these pillars to cover the bases that we need to cover on a really, really large animal.
Great.
we're trying to get our arms around here. No, I think this is a great start. So.
Great.
Thank you.
So I will add that in response to the topic you guys were discussing there are a few different topics that will go into greater discussion on. The first is the regulatory requirement for inspections, both in public and private, and where that line is as required by your permit. And we'll touch upon that. And the other piece will be of what might the structure look like for ongoing operation and maintenance for facilities that were installed in the ground prior to there being the details that are now in the ordinance of anything new. So there are a few other finer discussions in the details that we'll share with you yet tonight.
Those are the devil, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm. You got it.
All the devils are here, Councilman.
All right.
They are.
So I'd like to start talking about the operation and maintenance needs. To begin with, these are the water resources responsibilities, and they have, through this process, been outlined in this way that we now have the 4 primary objectives that the Water Resources Group is completing. So they are operations, maintenance, capital, and public engagement. If you were to look at each of these tasks side by side with the city staff organizational chart, you would see that there are a great number of groups and city staff members that are involved in completing all of the tasks laid out on this slide. Because of that, this process to drill down and make sure that we have a good handle on who is involved and what is required in completing each of these tasks, as will be shown in later in the tactical plan, that this was a pretty complicated web with many people involved. I do want to highlight the blue dashed lines. There are pieces of that were outlined in the tactical plan and in the vision exercises of pieces where the city staff would like to see greater emphasis or greater investment. First, with the maintenance being driven by that regulatory compliant with the MS4 permit, and then flood mitigation being a big part of the discussion, as well as the evaluation and modeling performed through this master plan. And then as far as stewardship, public engagement, and that leadership within the greater watershed, those 3 goals really show up in the program plan here of being a strong point of emphasis. Okay. So today, the water resource utility contributes $400,000 annually for O&M. Some water resources operation and maintenance activities, though, are covered by other revenue sources. So the data source outlined here is through the annual report as required by the NPDES MS4 permit. So this data, you can see changes year to year from 2016 through 2019, but the primary activities outlined there for inspection, repairs, street cleaning, training, and administration, those are all consistent throughout.
One thing to note too is, and Matt and Doug, correct me if I'm wrong here, the $400,000 amount is something that was an educated idea about what we would need for the utility to contribute to these types of activities. But we don't have the level of precision around what true O&M expenses are for the city because it's so cross-cutting and complex. We're sorting that out through this planning process, but this is now our educated assessment, not something that gets down to a level of precision.
Yeah. So in the utility, we have a certain amount of staff that are assigned to it that are funded from immediately in the public works area. So we have a sewer team that does sanitary sewer and storm sewer. And so that is kind of the direct connection. But we have across the city, park staff being one of them that is doing some of these activities. It's funded out of the general fund. You've got the oversight, things that community development's also doing that's not necessarily a direct cost center in the water resources utility today. It's basically the bare bones of our regulatory requirements, street cleaning, some of the repair work, and some of the restoration work in terms of the O&M side of it. Now the capital side's a different story, but yeah, to Pete's point that it is a mixture of, it's a teamwork effort, and that's going to need to continue going forward. And my hope is that we even get more creative with that and really coalesce around a water resources team and natural resources team that we could be a multi-departmental effort, and that's something that we're trying to ferret out in this process.
Quick question. What is a Strom sewer?
Oh, that sounds like a typo.
I didn't know if it was named after Strom Thurmond or what it was.
No, I don't believe so.
Just wondered.
Thank you for that catch. All right, so I'd like to talk next about the future operation and maintenance spending to achieve better BMP inspections and complete more BMPs. So first, to detail what is required by the permit is that all above ground structures must be inspected once every 5 years. So in some of the data you will see, you are surpassing that. These are annual values that you will see. So 20% per year. Above ground structures would be inlets, outlets, and any detention or surface structure. There is not currently an inspection protocol for the 300 existing BMPs within Clive, and we've kind of talked through this. This year, all 30 of the city-owned BMPs were inspected, and to my knowledge, that was the first time that all 30 had been visited in such a short proximity. That leaves approximately 270 private BMPs, which are typically only inspected if there should be a complaint or a concern or issue arising. So our plan going forward, both for the traditional gray stormwater structures that we listed, kind of that piped network, as well as the BMPs, our inspection plan is to first comply with the permit requirements. Second is to maximize the water quality benefit in the existing infrastructure. Next would be to maximize the useful life and extend that performance of the existing infrastructure. And finally, avoid greater failure and consequent structural repairs. So when we first started looking at BMPs, this is how we broke things out of where do we start? We know we touched the 30 city-owned BMPs this year, but how aggressive should we be in addressing the rest? So we started with prioritizing which BMPs based on their type or what could go wrong, what is likely to have a high maintenance requirement, and what needs to be revisited to be able to ensure that we are having that performance benefit that we would expect to see. So with that, we kind of broke these things out. So to visit once every 5 years, these are least likely to require intensive maintenance. So they are the parking detention facilities, so underground vaults or otherwise just a concrete line not visible from the surface detention facility, private established detention, and there are 55 of those. Those kind of in the middle group of that we want to visit every 2 years are the retention basins, and there are 200 of those facilities. And they may require routine maintenance, but they kind of fall in the middle that we don't need to get out there every year, but 2 touch points within the required 5-year would be great. And finally, the publicly owned, those 30, the larger wet ponds, anything that's vegetated or that could, have issues, whether the plugs are not established or what that growing season has entailed for the performance of that. We wanted to make sure anything vegetated, including oxbows, that we visited those once a year. So that outlines 53 facilities annually that are most likely to need that routine maintenance. So
Can I ask a question on that?
Sure.
Just for ignorance sakes, why oxbows and vegetated, even those smaller ponds, or oxbows would be the one that caught my attention. It didn't flood. Most often it's not flooding. The oxbows aren't getting the water, right, coming over. What do we do different with an oxbow? Why do we inspect it?
Sure. Good question. So with that establishment, what I would say is just because it is a vegetated area, that the adjacent perimeter, making sure that there isn't any unexpected erosion, or you're right, that the event that it would be more actively involved as opposed to the passive, within the floodplain. That's a good question. I can certainly revisit that with Rachel. When we were going through this decision tree, we wanted to include, well, I guess they're publicly owned as well. So maybe that fits in within that group on that side.
But just because they're publicly owned, in my head, I'm not thinking we have to inspect them when there's no really
No active.
Active benefit.
That's a good, that's a
right,
really
of
good
that.
point.
And it's just, I mean, really, it equals dollars.
Sure.
Right? Every time you inspect, it's in dollar, who's inspecting, it's time, it's all those things. I mean, I have other concerns about the oxbows. I mean, if we're inspecting them now, I have no clue why we're mowing around the edges of them at this point. That's craziness to me. on an
Rach?
oxbow. But anyways, that's a subject for another day.
Rachel Conrad's on the call with us. Rachel, can you hear us all right? You should be able to unmute yourself if you have some insights to share here.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yep, we've got you, Rachel. Go ahead.
Perfect. Yeah, so the oxbows in kind of the location where they're at in the green belt, we don't want them to get overrun with invasives and volunteer trees, so that when we do need to maintain them a little more heavily, like to get the silt out and that kind of thing, we'll be able to do it easily. That's kind of the thinking behind those.
I would imagine siltation as a result of an event would be probably the biggest concern.
Correct.
Right? And we're tracking that. So if there's an event, obviously, then we're inspecting.
Are we actively going to dig an oxbow out, Doug? I mean, they're meant, what was it, 30 species of fish inside an oxbow from one flood is impressive, right? And so to maintain them, it's like a wetland. I mean, look, I'm speaking out of line, this is your business, but the wetlands and things are meant to take their series through time, right? And fill and filter and do their thing. If we're actively going to be digging the wetlands we're putting in an oxbow, that's a whole nother game of maintenance throughout 20 years, 30 years.
And maybe it's not. Maybe
Yeah.
maybe I spoke out of school there. That just came to mind for me. Rachel, do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, so certainly if we decide to not ever excavate any of the silt and there is quite a bit that can come down just in one flood event and settle out there, eventually we wouldn't have any oxbow, essentially. I mean, it's not something you have to do every couple years, maybe 5 to 10 years likely would keep that, that flood storage there and that habitat. Because if we don't do anything, then it will silt in eventually, and then we wouldn't have that asset. Does that make sense?
The inspection doesn't every year imply that there is a large maintenance activity then associated with it. An oxbow may show itself to be well established after first year of plugs or a cover crop of some sort, not too much siltation going into it, so no need to go in and do a big excavation. But we do need to keep our eyes on it because those green things can obviously change on us pretty darn quickly. So that's why we want to keep eyes on it, commit ourselves to keeping eyes on it annually, as opposed to the gray infrastructure, which is a little easier first for us to kind of look at completely in its shape, but what an intake looks like. And we have some good estimates on how long that should survive in normal wear and tear.
I know I'm going around here, but Mayor, I'm just not, I don't know. And I can do this offline, just not getting a comfort level for me. It's not just the oxbow, but then I'm using the oxbow as the example, but I walked down there a few weeks ago and we're mowing it. And now you're talking about filtration and erosion. That's why you leave it long and leave the growth there. So invasive species I get, but growth of grass and other things on how we maintain it, and coming in with a excavator with a mower on it to mow around a natural a natural area. I got a whole problem in believing this whole theory here, because it just goes in the face of everything I've learned of putting oxbows and wetlands at my day job that we just did 18, 20 acres of and other things. You know, we're told not to mow. We're not told not to do all these things.
Yeah, and we, I think, certainly need to probably look at how we're mowing and when we're mowing. In the summer, yeah, the summer is maybe not the best time. I know we want to keep back invasives, but can we do it every other year? Can we use maybe some less invasive equipment? I think that's definitely things that we can look at.
Yeah. And there's giant tracks.
Absolutely.
Going down both sides of those oxbows. I mean, huge track excavator, mud tracks. 2 years ago, we had the goats around them, you know, and things like that. And now we got giant machines driving down the middle of them. It's mind-boggling to me and neighbors. It's why I went down there. As folks were saying, can you go look at this?
So this is really great feedback. Tonight, our purpose was not to get into all of the particulars of every type of facility, but to start to show you how this can ratchet up to what a bigger investment looks like.
Question on the premise of this whole thing, right? And so, and Stephanie's been kind to say she'll go back and find the answer of why some of these every year versus every 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and
that's the basis of my whole discussion.
That's probably what we need to look at. Eric, I know you have something.
Yeah.
I want to do some follow-up there, though.
Stephanie, on the private established detention, are we talking about HOAs? We talking about people's private land, both of them? Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Sure.
And would we need easements and permission from the homeowners?
Very good question. In our analysis on this process, through this process, we have identified where there is not existing right-of-way access that we would need permission or that sort of communication to let the homeowners know that we would be visiting and inspecting. So yes, could be specific private property owners, or it could be a group of homeowners. So both of those are existing scenarios that would need to be inspected.
And then if we had required intensive maintenance on these private properties, what type of mechanism would the city utilize to enact that maintenance on private property?
That's a really good question. So through this process, the reason that we are interested in visiting all of these, the reason that we didn't say that we are only going to stop at public is because we do want that information of, is this performing or is it not? You're right that is going to open a box for us to have the truth of, is it performing or is it not? Where we go from there of, is it connected? Is it contributing to the rest of the city system? And do we see that beneficial advantage for the rest of the performance of the city system? That is yet to be understood in each of those individual cases. But we have gone through and quantified what the water quality benefit is for each of these facilities. We have gone through and quantified, a few of those other decision trees of, does this actually fall out to be a great benefit to the city or not? I think that in the scenario where there is a private facility that does not provide benefit, I think that abandoning those facilities is a potential option. And I think I would advise in that direction, if there is not a path towards rehabilitation, or that it is going to be, there is a clear pathway to bring that up to performance standards and compliance on that side. That would be my recommendation at this point.
I guess I have to look at a case-by-case basis then.
Correct. And without having done these inspections and without having visited, we have done our due diligence to this far to be able to understand what the potential benefit is. Now we need to confirm what is the actual performance in field and see if those things align.
Thank you. Councilman, it's a great question too, because you could see the logic play out here. We find out some have, for various reasons, not a whole lot of benefit, but there's still an obligation for that private property owner. Some, though, that have a much more significant potential benefit for the water resources outcomes we need to achieve as a city, which then creates some different decision points for the city on where we choose to invest, where we choose potentially not to invest, where we go in and push to work harder with the partner there, the private property owner, to bring this up to performance, and other places where it might not be worth the work. Not all parts of the watershed are created equal, is what it comes down to.
What is our regulatory authority over over these private, whether it's managed through an HOA or any other mechanism? What is our regulatory authority over that ultimately?
I want to bring Doug and Rachel in to speak to that. Maybe Rachel, you could take a shot at it first, and then I'll bring Doug in.
Yeah, sure. So whenever these facilities are built, we do have easements. So we have access to the facilities that way. And then as part of our MS4, because they're part of our greater storm water system, we are required to inspect them and essentially ensure that they're functioning.
And so our recourse against a private property no matter what it is, commercial or otherwise, is what? A fine, come in and do the work, bill them? What's the recourse?
And Doug probably has more familiarity with the actual ordinance and the fines and stuff that are available, but essentially we can, the first step would be to notify them that they're out of compliance and give them a chance to bring it into compliance. And then there are mechanisms to where we can fine them or do the work and bill them essentially.
I'm gonna come back, and I asked that for a reason. I'm gonna come back to Mike's point on oxbows, and then I'm thinking about ponds and other things that can silt up with significant events over a fairly short period of time. And I guess theoretically they're doing their jobs by doing that, right? By filling up and silting up. The challenge is to keep them excavated or dredged so that we can continue to have that asset functioning, right? To continue to fill up time and time and time again, whether it's natural or not. I think on the oxbows, Mike, I see your points. You know, these have been experimental for us. They cost a lot of money to dig up and put in place with a lot of grants and a lot of our resources. So I can understand that we want to maintain them to some level. We got to use that. We got to use that track loader for something. But no, I'm kidding there. It's we had a lot of discussion about the purchase of that piece of equipment. But it's so I think there's a lot of experimental things going on there from a maintenance perspective. But at the end of the day, we want these natural or otherwise to be functioning time and time again. I just want to be clear on. That's why I asked the question: what's our recourse against those that don't keep them functioning if they're private? And obviously, as we implement an inspection program with guidelines and timelines and so forth, that starts to come together a lot better. I trust that's what you're suggesting.
Yes.
Okay.
Doug, anything else you'd like to add to that? Should be able to unmute yourself, Doug.
Not necessarily. Again, most of these facilities that are on shared property, so multiple property owners have a detention basin across the rear yards of their lots. There certainly would be easements in place granted to the city for the benefit of the community. The easements do have maintenance responsibilities defined and provisions to allow the city to resolve any issues within the functioning space of that easement area. Commercial properties will be a little bit different, particularly if those facilities are located singularly on a property. In those cases, generally there were not easements identified because it was only the property owner that was benefited. In those cases, you're going to have to rely on the provisions in the code that require commercial property owners to maintain their sites in accordance with approved site plans. And in that case, you have a municipal infraction process, which can be a little bit cumbersome, but there are methods to force compliance if it comes to that. In any case, it is going to be really important to define the process, to be able to clearly communicate that out to all the impacted property owners and really, you know, as we do with most things, really pay attention to the details and working with the property owners to make this as much of a partnership arrangement as possible rather than just kind of the regulatory hand coming down, because this will be a new experience for all of these property owners, because I am quite certain that very few of these facilities have had any kind of inspection or observation from the property owners since their initial construction.
Excuse me. Thank you, Doug. Please, Seth.
Excuse me.
Bless you. So with this proposed plan, it would help us achieve the important water resources outcomes, but it will require a greater investment towards the operation and maintenance fund to execute these things. With the plan that we've outlined here, we would require approximately 160 inspections done annually, and that's about 5 times the current inspection rate of the BMPs. I want to switch over to a bit of a discussion on the gray system. So this is talking about inlets, outlets, and manholes of those 3 types of infrastructure. And I wanted to share with you some of the historical data of what we have been seeing in the data reported in the annual report. So of every 100 of those structures that exist within the GIS database, we have found out, going back and refining this since then, that some of those are private. They are not all public. So there is greater detail that could be mined from here. But in the full data set, of every 100 facilities, 60 of them are inspected every year. 42 of those 60 do not need repair, 16 need repair and are not repaired, and 2 of them are completed with those repairs. So as we go through and evaluating how do we want to address these O&M concerns with the goals that we outlined before, as far as extending useful life and making sure that we are achieving the maximum water quality benefit that we had expected. Here are the 2 phases that we are proposing to begin with. The first is to really move the needle on the repair and maintenance. So focus on that through phase 1 of really expanding that out and try to get that blue portion of that graph significantly bigger to make sure that those that we have identified and that backlog to say that we know that these do need maintenance and upkeep, that we are expanding the number there before we go on to phase 2 and start focusing more on what are those that we're not inspecting. As I mentioned before, per your regulatory requirements, you are meeting that inspection goal. But this is after we are in a stable place and we make sure that we are maintaining a good number of those that we've identified. We would expand then to those that we aren't looking at, that we aren't getting a routine touch point. So I wanted to share this a bit as a look forward of where we're going. So we talked about a few of these decisions that we could make. I know when we start talking about operation and maintenance or some of this public outreach or some of these other big tasks, one of the limits that I know that we have been discussing through this process is who will be able to complete these things. So as we go through and look at the full utility and the summary of how funding is being spent, we can look at some of those decisions we've made and see, is there support for additional staff, and how would we go through that cost there, and what would the finances look like? In the same way, we can do that side-by-side comparison of the proposed operation and maintenance expenses, and as well with the tools that we've built and the information and all of the feedback that you provided to us that we built into this tool. We can also then go through this project that is proposed, or that is included in the graphs here, is the Indian Hills Channel remeander, whether that is cash funded or funded with debt service. So being able to look at that 10-year projection of how some of these decision trees will play out. This is kind of the next exercise that we will go through with your feedback on some of these decisions for how we would like to go forward with staffing and operation and maintenance, and as well as some of the capital projects that we will be looking at that in a holistic way on that 10-year horizon, and to be able to really understand each of those consequences and impacts to the vitality of the
Stephanie,
whole
can you
program.
go back a slide, please?
Yes.
Tell us about 2026.
Sure. So this is, as I mentioned, this is the Indian Hills Channel remeander. So that particular project, that is an example that is not set into the current CIP, but I wanted to highlight one project that we know is in the recommended list of, if it were completely cash funded in that year, that is how things would look. So I am using this only for illustration purposes to be able to highlight how we are going to go through the next phase of taking your feedback and back into the tools that we've built to make sure that we can see that impact and cause and effect of some of those decisions that we have yet to make for the full recommendation plan.
Thank you.
Sure. So the question from this section is really not a question. Achieving the goals in the vision document that we've discussed in the first part of this in this evening would require an increase in the capital investments and potentially the annual operation and maintenance in multiple water resources areas. As an example, we've shown to you the type of goals or metrics that we would like to be reaching in our operation and maintenance through BMP inspections and repairs. Is there any other question or feedback that you would like, Pete?
I have a quick question. And you may have said this earlier, maybe I just missed it, but I'm still struggling with what is the return that we're getting on all of these additional inspections and repairs on the BMPs? Why do we need all this additional investment other than the MS4 permit?
Yeah, that.
Give me the big picture. Why?
Good, sure. Good question. It is the MS4 permit. So when we started the inception of this project, we knew that there were BMPs spread about the city that we didn't have a lot of information for. So, and as is required, the permit language is not, in my opinion, supremely explicit in what needs to be included in this inspection rate. What it does spell out is it asks for what is included in the stormwater system. And as we have discussed and interpreted that language to mean that it should also include BMPs as they are part of the stormwater system. That interpretation has led us down this path of trying to be able to understand and quantify the full benefit that they may provide, and then compare that to the performance being observed currently. It was intended from the beginning that not all BMPs would provide that benefit or would be at that high performance level, in which case the documentation that the city is managing of this is part of our system, this is what is within our GIS database, these are our assets in our stormwater system, that data management would also reflect what is part of the system or not, as reported for that permit requirement.
Stephanie, in line with increased O&M operational capabilities, what's the recommendation on FTEs or personnel changes to the city?
That's a really great question. At this point, the goals that we have set are based on the best data that we have available. So as we drive forward of trying to make sure that we are addressing those repairs that have been identified, it is unclear with the data we have available if that repair is a full replacement, if that repair is a minor rehab sort of project. So the recommendation at this point would we've established this goal in the next calendar year. Do we make any progress or advance on those repairs? Through that process, our inspection data, we also would recommend that it is refined in that way so that we can make that decision for FTEs going forward. At this point, it's really difficult to know what is required. So we do know, and we have been told that it's going to be a hard push to be able to do more with the staff that's available. So to be able to better inform that of what that FTE looks like, I would ask that we wait for better information.
And I guess we'll have to take it on a year-by-year basis if we decide to adapt this plan, and also track man hours and things of that nature. And I know we've got Lucidity software we can utilize as well.
Correct, and that would be the refinement to that Lucidity inspection format of how can we quantify or qualify what is the real need and what is the real repair needed. Repair is a pretty big blanket category, so we would like to have a better handle on that before an FTE is recommended.
We'd use that same GPS Lucidity software to establish the schedules, projects, open up tickets, close tickets, things of that nature.
Correct.
Hours.
As we're talking about those operation and maintenance improvements, Lucidity is a really strong tool to be able to do a lot of what we're discussing here and to be able to drive that workflow really cleanly.
That was the process improvement that Corey and Rachel presented on at the end of July.
I think getting back to Ted's point is that really through, I think what you're suggesting, through regular inspection of all of the facilities and driving repairs of those facilities that need it, we have a better operating system, a more efficient system, a more effective system. It probably reduces property damage in the future, et cetera. It just improves the whole system. Do you quantify that in dollars? I don't know. Ted, is that was that part of your question, or?
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going to go, Mayor, is do we have a way to quantify that and to show a return on this? Because, I mean, obviously this is going to get real expensive, and I'm just trying to understand, what we're trying to achieve here and what the benefit is to the city overall.
Pete, take a swing at that, if you would, with Stephanie.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'll go start where Stephanie did. It's the law.
Yeah.
And the way we interpret the law right now suggests that we're doing it in a very precise way to meet a minimum compliance standard. I would add that I think the future regulatory environment is not going to become more lenient. Iowa is already a state that seems to be lagging other parts of the country in ways that they work with their Department of Natural Resources with their EPA regions to come up with what's going to be acceptable. We don't want to be, when we're building 50-year infrastructure here, whether it's green or gray, designing and then maintaining to a standard that is just barely complying when we have a pretty good hunch that the bigger requirements ahead of us. We want to make sure that we are designing and maintaining to a standard that meets that, what I think is a likely case where there will be a more stringent requirement in the future. But more than that, we want a well-performing system that conveys water and that does good water quality work as well. We don't know whether those things are being accomplished unless we are regularly inspecting and then making targeted improvements. Will we be able to repair everything the way that Stephanie outlined, I think, in her chart? I think that that's something that we'll learn more about as we do the inspections and actually get into the maintenance program, but we have choices ahead of us that are not made. We can choose to make the more aggressive O&M investment. We can choose to keep it more level as well. The plan here is not designed to be a rigid hit this milestone, milestone. It's designed to give us, as I interpret it, that vision document that says, okay, these are the things that we're aspiring toward. These are the things that we want to grow toward, all across all 6 pillars. Some will move more quickly than others. Some we will dial up, some that we will dial back as well. I do think that, and I'll credit Doug with this idea, at the very least, we want to make sure that we maintain what we've got before we get real crazy about building a lot more new things. Certainly we've got investments in front of us, but let's not let it get worse than what we're dealing with right now. That speaks to me about an important reason to do targeted and smart O&M.
Thanks. Stephanie, anything to add?
Sure. I would add as well, just in that kickoff to this, when we are looking at those 6 pillars, stewardship and our relationship with the rest of the watershed is really important to that success. So I will say, as we do anticipate the changes in the build out upstream, that we would like to be able to be that model, to be that early adapter, to say, these are some great examples and some good programs where you can manage the water on your property, on your land as you're developing it, so that it, certainly has that water quality benefit, but also ideally provides some of that supremely beneficial retention time to allow some of the water that is in Walnut Creek to pass through before the rest of their newly converted and altered hydrology would then also need to pass through Clive.
Isn't our permit up to?
Rachel, I'm correct. It's every 5 years that we go through our renewal cycle, correct?
When is that renewal? It is 5 years.
Yeah. Rachel, was that 23?
I believe we start the process in 23 and then the actual renewal date is in 24.
Okay.
I do want to just add really quick that as far as return on investment, one of the public facilities that really comes to mind is the Des Moines Waterworks Basin. It is completely overrun with invasive vegetation, and we're going to look at spending a lot of money to clear that out. If we were able to inspect that regularly, we could be more proactive and spend a lot less money over time. So that's just kind of one example as far as maintenance. we might have to do a lot of more work up front, but then once we kind of get in the groove, we can save time and money that way.
Last topic for the water resources plan this evening is the incentive program options. I've got 3 of them to share with you tonight. We wanted to first start with talking about some of our thinking and identifying an ideal stormwater cost incentive program. So we were looking for a program that would achieve the desired water resources outcomes, especially in the prioritized areas of the watershed. We wanted a program that advances the city priorities like increasing property values, catching and holding stormwater close to where it lands, and putting less stress on the existing infrastructure. We wanted a program that the execution didn't overwhelm city with costs and responsibilities that outweigh the outcomes achieved. We are looking for programs that have the operations and maintenance front-loaded for both the city and the resident and property owner, so that we limit the major expenses or time commitments after the BMP is established.
That's my little plug for, I've been weeding my rain garden for all summer, and I'm kind of a big stormwater dork, so I'm happy to do it, but I know I'm not the typical property owner in Clive. Those are the kinds of facilities that have an ongoing O&M cost as opposed to front-loaded.
Wanted the program to have a shared cost between the city and program participants. And a few of the benefits that we outlined is beautifying property, reducing energy costs, reducing fertilizer need, increasing property value, fixes problem areas in a yard, and positive affirmation from other community members. So as we mentioned, we do want the resident committed to the lifetime of the maintenance. We're trying to be intentional about shortening what that maintenance requirement looks like, but that it would not have an excessive need for ongoing time and resources to keep the BMP or cash share incentive program in compliance. We are concerned for performance impact due to sale of property or transfer to a new property owner. And we wanted a program that was scalable and would require a standardized oversight by city in the case of unexpected failure. And we wanted to be able to measure and track the benefits created by the program. We wanted this program to complement and not duplicate other programs available to Clive residents and businesses. So this portion, we were in coordination and wanted to make sure that other proposals, or specifically on Harbach, that we were in coordination with that.
You go back.
Yes.
No performance impact due to transfer of property ownership.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what's that? Define that a little bit.
Sure. So what we didn't want, for the example that Pete shared, if he had been carefully tending to his rain garden and sold his property to somebody who was unfamiliar with what that requirement was, but lived in that the performance of that BMP would then fall flat if there wasn't that same dedication or investment in maintaining that facility, or if they simply didn't know what it was. But trying.
How do we assure that? Right? Like, how do we assure as a city, what's our role?
Sure. So to jump ahead, the programs that we are recommending are a tree program and a soil quality restoration programs that we feel would not require as much hands-on interaction, and that would meet a lot of these ambitious things that we were looking for with this type of program. So at this time, rain gardens are not something that we are proposing because they do introduce more complications. They're wonderful and they have a great wealth of benefit, but they're more difficult. So to begin with, for the reasons outlined on this slide, we are starting with just tree program and SQR.
But to answer your question specifically, Councilman, I have an agreement that I've signed with Polk County effectively and the USDA because of the investment they made in my rain garden that says I will maintain it for 10 years. And then they would come and inspect. And if they inspect and find that I have not maintained it, then they have recourse to come and start to put some pressure on me to get it back into compliance.
But if I buy your house in 5 years, does that come with the house?
I believe that in this situation it would, but I'm not a real estate attorney, so I don't want to get too far down that path.
But so the city's role is not in that example or future example, we're picking easy ones to trees and that type of thing so that we don't have to enforce it.
Things that we think would be multi-beneficial as well. And also lower on the front end, front ending the O&M and the sort of the lift, long-term, less obligation to the city. Okay.
Pete, would you like me to go through this?
Yeah, no, I can take us through this. So we've done some preliminary research in all of these areas. We narrowed in on trees, soil quality restoration, and a grant program, in part because we've seen these be successful in neighboring communities, and we think they meet many of, if not all of, the ideas we mentioned on the ideal program slide. So this model that we're presenting, not the final model, it can take whatever shape we find to be appropriate, is based largely on Johnston's very popular program. Working with Richard and his team, we think that a 1-inch diameter tree, somewhere in the neighborhood of $150 per tree. Richard, am I correct that that's probably the high end of that range? Okay, so the numbers could be lower. That's the kind of thing where we'd certainly want to go and look for a cost share partner that would help us make those initial purchases. But the beauty of the program from an execution standpoint is one contract managed by the city. The city then creates an online portal for people who want to participate to come in, make their payment, then commit to picking up a tree on a given day, and then also commit to making sure it gets planted and gets established as well. And after that, tree is there to contribute to the urban canopy. It's there to contribute to beneficial stormwater effects throughout the city. The downside on the program like this is that it isn't targeted. I said it before that not all parts of the watershed are created equal. We've got places where we know we have bigger stormwater needs. This type of program is designed to cover everybody who would want to participate. And if it's anything like Johnston's, it will be very, very heavily subscribed. And so we'll have a lot of folks too, even at this scale, who might likely say, gosh, how in the world it sold out in the first 10 minutes? I didn't get a chance to do it. Last year in Johnston, it sold out in 6. It didn't go quite this big as what we're proposing here, but it was massively popular.
Could we include some type of monitoring system in that where, yes, they get in their portal and then we had someone a month, 3 months, whatever it is, drive by and just take a look at that tree to make sure it's not, dead in their garage, but it's actually being planted?
I think that that's something that we could do.
Or offer help in them planting the tree. I mean, that'd be the ideally, but again, that's time and labor. I get it.
To my knowledge, that is not something that's done in the Johnston program, but that's the level of just follow up on the front end of the project that we could do to help ensure that we get a better result as well.
I just throwing it out there.
Sure, good idea. So this is one example of a program. Stephanie, let's go ahead and take a look at number 2. So soil quality restoration is a much more difficult or not as intelligible type of project to many of the audiences that we're going to work with over the course of lifting up water resources in Clive. People don't understand what it looks like when they drive by and see a bunch of what looks like dirt and compost covering up all the grass and maybe even killing it. When in truth, this is the kind of good soil stewardship that leads to great water resources outcomes as well. So we've got a bigger community education lift to do with soil quality restoration. The great benefit, though, is that as we have observed talking to our partners like Polk County and others, once you get it done, it creates good results for a long time, and not just results for catching stormwater, great results also for beautifying lawns. With all of these programs, trees or soil, if it's not going to make the private property or the commercial property more beautiful, we're going to have a hard time making a sell. And at the end of the day, we need converts. We need people who want to buy into this as much as we've bought into it as well. So we need something like soil quality restoration to be something they understand and understand that it's going to give them some great lawn results as well. We think that for SQR, because we do have a bigger education lift, that it'd be appropriate to start with a pilot program. The cost of doing this relative to other types of soil, other types of water resources practices is very cost effective. Getting it to scale, though, will be an education challenge, and also making sure we identify areas where ideally, if we're going to set up one single contractor to go, that we're able to get in time a group of people there in one common area so that they can all sort of do it together. In the first few years, though, to get enough adoption, we may be in a situation where we need to do 100% cost share, or where we need to not only do targeted areas across the city. So we've got an example in each kind of spot in the city, but then need to do some actual intentional engagement with that property owner where we invite their neighbors to come down and check out the great results that they got as well. If we're not doing that teaching part of the soil about SQR while we're doing the project, then we're not gonna, I don't think, gonna get the kind of adoption that would make this valuable. Okay, the final option, and we are happy to develop even additional options, because right now Clive is, along with Bondurant, the only city in the metro right now that doesn't have some kind of a program, whether it's trees, SQR, or just a broad grant that can be used to pay for lots of things. Our final recommendation would be a city-funded grant program. Now, the way that I've articulated this right now is that it's very narrowly focused on an improvement to a BMP that the city has identified. So these are areas that we are already required to be inspected, sort of that group of 300. It wouldn't necessarily be every piece of shore on the creek or every drainage area of every part of every drainage that's in the city. But because the city has an interest and an obligation to be dealing with these 300 identified BMPs, this program, as I've described it here, is focused to send public dollars to those places that are privately owned, but are one of our required BMPs to keep our hands on. The other recommendations here focus on making sure that a city grant investment would be in improving the performance of the BMP, not just handling the irregular O&M costs. And I took the language specifically from Urbandale's program on this one. A good example of sort of the distinction. Based on what we've read in the Urbandale recommendation or requirements, they will not pay using those grant dollars for just the normal sediment removal of an entire pond, but they would pay for the sediment removal from a facility where there's a forebay, or the creation of a forebay that was designed to catch sediment before it gets into the rest of the pond, or for stabilization upstream of the pond, so that the sediment is less likely to as quickly make its way down to the big pond as well. Does that distinction make sense? It's investments that are improving the performance of the BMP, not designed just to continue to to pay for its regular maintenance, like a silt removal from an entire pond. Is that distinction? I'm watching here for nods on this. And Merrick, I know you've got a lot of interest in this here.
So what I'm thinking about is the guy who lives down the street from me, who's got a small stream in the backyard that he's had to spend $80,000 to shore up his backyard. So could he apply for a grant for $5,000, for example, under this program? Because those are some of the people that we need to be helping with grants that are having some catastrophic damage done to their personal property because of stormwater management in the city. And those are the little guys that don't have the resources. So I'm thinking about those amongst many others.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But that comes to mind as an example.
Right. Not knowing all the specifics of your neighbor's situation, I don't want to say yay or nay on whether that would be applicable or not. One of my primary takeaways from reading about the Urbandale program is that it has taken many iterations over the years to narrow in on the things that they think will and will not perform. The thing that I started with as sort of my Clive take on that potentially was that focus on the existing BMPs. So if that facility or that neighbor that you're talking about who's had this damage is not one of our identified BMPs that the city has an obligation already to handle and to some respect, then in this scenario, it would not be eligible. But we can design the program to work more narrowly with individual property owners who have had a big land slough off in their backyard because of a big drainage that's coming down at them, or has a real loose spot of shoreline on the creek as well. Those are all choices that we could choose to make. All of these things should also be seen though and what their cost figure is going to be. Do we want to design a program here that allows the city to invest in multiple small projects or make smaller contributions to many projects. Some of these can make that $10, $20, $30, $40,000 price tag, go and even higher. We can look at that pretty quick. I do think it's important that we establish some sort of cap, either as a percentage of the total project or a flat dollar figure, depending on what type of property owner or shared property we're talking about.
Absolutely. The criteria is going to be really important.
Yep.
And I think we can continue to work on that. That'll evolve over time, but this is good discussion. I think that this will help us try to cover as many bases as we possibly can. And then, what are you thinking about in terms of a money pool to fund a grant program like that? Is it 50,000? Is it something more than that or less than that? Or what do you think?
Very back of napkin, Matt and I were thinking, what would $100,000 start look like if we were going to do all three of them in the same year? That's a pretty big number. This is new space for us, and that's a lot of experimenting with real money. It doesn't need to start necessarily, though, at that kind of level. The other part of this, especially with the grant program, is we would need to come up with, using our criteria, and to come up with a way to fairly say yes to this and no to that, because there will always be more need than what we have dollars to spend on as well. So establishing a grant program like this also means establishing, sort of taking on that responsibility on our shoulders to say, we're going to pick winners and losers on this. We're going to come up with reasons to justify that are based on the outcomes we want to achieve for water resources throughout the city. But there will be some people who have applications that are certainly more attractive than other people. Tonight, what we wanted direction on is, as a council, we can refine this and we can get this to a place where it feels good as our starting point. But of the three that we've presented, do any of them rise higher than the others? Do all three of them seem to feel pretty good? Do some of them feel not good at all?
Would it be possible for you to circulate that chart that you?
Sure. So this is a great example of us not wanting to duplicate other people. This is just a chart that they put together of stormwater BMP cost share programs in Central Iowa. It's broken out by city and then the type of thing that can be funded by each of those programs as well.
Hey, Pete.
Yeah.
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt anyone there. I'm sure you haven't done a full analysis, but have you done any type of preliminary analysis for any of these programs on the kind of return that we can expect from them? If we're, if we're sending out money, do we on that, whether that's a monetary return or, it slows the flow rate or whatever the metric is, what's the return for doing any one of these programs?
Sure. So have not done a specific assessment tied to the numbers that I'm suggesting as a starting for the number of trees that would be added to the canopy, the number of soil quality restoration projects that would actually happen as well, since that the benefit there is quite dependent on the yard that it's being installed on as well, and the existing quality of the soils that are there. And also then with the city funded grant program proposal. What I can tell you, Councilman, is that we do have a way to calculate the benefit created by a tree of a certain size. There are calculators that we can use to evaluate, as we add more and more of those trees, how much water we would expect that tree to help catch where it is. Again, not always in the place where we ideally want it to go, but we can do that kind of a rough calculation. With soil quality restoration, based on the percentage of organic material that we're adding and the sort of loosening up of the soil we do, we can calculate with this much application, this is the result that we expect to get and more water captured there as well. Location matters. We would not necessarily in this scenario get to control the location for all of those types of projects, but we still would be able to say with confidence, we are catching this much more water. So that would be the benefit that's created there. With the grant program, I'll take us back to the start of the presentation where we were talking about a bunch of people who have never received a letter from a city like this saying, oh my goodness, I'm not supposed to let bulrushes grow up in that detention area. It's because it's taking up the volume that it's supposed to have to hold water at a big water event. They're saying, oh, I can't, how am I supposed to deal with this? To the mayor's point, that's a really uncomfortable letter for the city to send. It's a really bad letter for the resident to receive. Then we go into the process of working with them to sort out, okay, how can we get this back to good? The grant program then is something the city and our team can bring with us to say, the big load's going to be on you to get this done, but we recognize that there's something that we can do here to facilitate that as well, because there's a public interest potentially also served by this facility working better. So that would be the benefit created by potentially a grant program that I see.
So for the future, as we're mulling these different programs over, I know I personally would like to see some sort of cost benefit analysis. If we're going to be shoveling out money, what are we getting back for that? And again, it might be different metrics. It may not be monetary based. There may be other qualitative, returns on that, and that's fine. So it doesn't all have to be apples to apples, but I know I would like to see that kind of cost benefit in order to help my decision making.
Excellent. We can take a crack at that, Councilman. Thank you for that.
Yeah, just to follow up on Ted's point, looking just quickly through the list of what some of the other cities are doing, where it's rain barrels or rain gardens or whatever, and I understand the complexity of some of these things, but I'm wondering if we shouldn't also look at, if someone's got a great interest in getting a rain barrel and, that does something really good, or a rain garden or whatever it happens to be, should we not also encourage that in some manner? I mean, should we have, if we're looking at trees and soil and whatever, also have a pot set aside so that if someone is really, really enthusiastic about one of these other very successful measures, that we also can address those?
Yep. Rain barrels are a good example. I use rain barrels at my house. Are rain barrels successful? I'd argue that they're not. They're great when I don't want to turn on the spigot to water my plants, but the volume that they actually catch is so small relative, I think, to some of these other practices that they would be lower on my recommendation list. Now, if our measuring stick is adoption and we want to create a broader field so people can bring what they think is what the right application for their space, and a rain barrel very well maybe it is in certain parts of around my house, then I certainly agree, Councilman, that logic would lead us then to think, all right, let's create a broad set of opportunities and then let people have more of that a la carte selection experience.
Well, and again, I realize one size doesn't fit all, and you said, it depends on the yard, the land, and so forth, but certainly I'm with Ted on, what would, generally speaking, what would be the most effective means for keeping the most water, in place when it falls.
Sure. And that, again, is why we think soil quality restoration is so important and why we're actually bringing that into many city projects in the future as well.
I think the soil restoration may be a harder sell than some of these other things.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
People don't want to mess with, if they got a yard, but some of these others.
Mm-hmm. And there are great benefits, educational benefits, just awareness raising that come with having those barrels out there.
Yeah, yeah.
I would offer to Councilmember that I go back a little bit to what on that first slide is, and to Councilmember McCoy's question is the maintenance side, right? There is practices that may hold more water than soil quality restoration, but then it gets into the question of the maintenance, and then if you have property owners change, whereas SQR, at least it's something that you can do, and it is not maintenance free, but it's pretty close if it's done right the first time. And so that's another piece of this that I would offer to the council, is how can we keep it simple too, from both a city, making sure it still performs, but also kind of hitting the easy button for that homeowner too, whereas there's that initial hurdle, but then the long-term maintenance is reduced.
It'd be nice to see us on a list like that, on a chart like that.
Mm-hmm.
Itemizing what we have available for our residents and businesses if they're interested in doing these things that we're working really hard on right now. So I'm glad you brought that, Pete. It's good to see that.
What I would add to that,
copy of it actually. Yeah.
What I would add to that, Your Honor, too, is being on that list with programs that are effective, because I think not to, what I want us, I've told this to Pete in this conversation when we've been looking at these, is let's make sure there are programs that are going to be used and are effective, because I know there's programs on that list that aren't necessarily utilizing all the money. And I don't know if that specific community can tell you. Some of the questions that Councilmember Weaver and yourself and others have been asking is, what is that ROI? What is that cost benefit? Is it actually achieving something than just having a, having something, giving a grant to a homeowner? And I think that's the critical point that I think we all need to get to is, what is that ROI? And then have that on the chart too, to say, this is something that's actually being effective in our community, which I think is a big part of this.
Yeah. Great point.
I don't see Polk City on that, but I can't read much of it anyways, but they do have a soil restoration program.
Yep.
And I know they're doing it this year as they picked up a couple dump trucks full in the last week. So it'd
be interested to hear
see
from some of the communities that are doing that, what kind of response they're getting.
We were happy to hear that Polk City was doing that. We'll have to check in with our esteemed colleague Doug Olendike on what the implementation actually looks like up there in that neck of the woods.
So it looks like well, Stephanie, I'll let you continue then on this slide here then, if we're kind of wrapping up with questions.
Right. Well, the question here is, yeah, and I'm getting good direction here, that you want to see relative water benefit of these various programs compared to each other. There's interest in spreading out into a bigger a la carte type option for more, to help encourage more people to participate and pick the option that's right for their yard. That last one though, about a grant program, I would like some more direction from the council on whether this is something that most of you believe we should continue to pursue refining and developing as well. The big benefit as I see it right now is that if we're going to ask folks to bring their spaces, their private property into compliance, or if we're going to spread even further, when we are going to choose to work with folks who've got big erosion problems and other or ambitious ideas about what they'd like to do on their private property, like building a rain garden. Is that something that we as a city then would, and you as a council would like to see the city invest in as well? Those would be much bigger awards potentially than the kinds of things we're talking about with trees and with soil or even rain barrels and some of these smaller practices. The benefit being, in some cases, if we're going to them and saying, come into compliance, we then can tell them, we're coming to the table with you because we see some public benefit in this as well.
Yeah, and I'll step up on it first. I think that's more important than anything, any of the other options that we can do. The other options are nice to have.
Mm-hmm.
I think that particular one is really important for us to have, but it's got to be really well thought out. I think the parameters need to be very clear and very established. And I think we have to build it in such a way that gives us the most flexibility to cover a budget year for whatever the pool is good for, and maybe find other ways to fund it as well. Other grant opportunities, other benevolent opportunities, whatever it might happen to be, and how can we strategically partner to build a really effective grant program. But I think we've got to put ourselves in a position to really cover all the bases as much as we possibly can. I know that's a tall order, and the 300 BMPs, et cetera, is probably a good targeted start, but we have these others, and we've seen examples over the years. I think I've probably shared more than once that in my time in public service, I've spent more time on water conveyance, erosion, property damage issues related to stormwater than almost just about anything. So I think that's really important.
Okay.
And I think we could do those other ones pretty inexpensively. That's my thought. Others, Susan?
Well, this is something I've been asking for a while. It's been embarrassing to me that with Clive being held up as a really great example of collaboration and working to address issues that we haven't had a program that partners with property owners in the community. I felt like we have been a leader in every other way, and this is a great time to step up to do something here. And I'm interested in probably seeing more options than just the limited ones that have been given. One I was expecting to see was permeable pavers. That's something that's kind of encouraged throughout the nation, really. So that's one I'd like to at least look at. But I agree with the points about having the projects be effective, and really, really appreciate the work that you put into this. It's really exciting.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, I think we're on the right track. I'm always a strong believer in a public-private partnership. I don't think the city should foot the whole bill. It's all of our problem, right? And I also like the wider selection that the public and the citizens can choose from. I think these are three really good ones with the trees, the soil, and the grants right there. I think those are solid. I do like having, maybe you've got a small yard, you want a rain barrel, you've got a big slope and you want a rain garden. I don't know. I like the permeable pavers atmosphere too. Give people the choice to what they want to do. The only thing I'd add is those individuals that perhaps don't qualify for the grant, we give them the mayor's phone number so they could express that to the mayor right here. Make sure you understand.
Sure, that'll happen anyway. Okay.
Yeah, I think we're on the right track.
Then I'll say, me and Councilmember Klein are gonna come over on Saturday morning and sit down with you to have coffee and talk about it.
It's a really nice rain garden we can sit on at my house. We can have coffee
I'd
there.
like to see
Mike,
that.
any thoughts?
No, I'm supportive of the concept. I guess, I need to see at some point all of these grant programs that we have discussed in a few days, how they'll be paid for. I mean, we're talking about buying out south of University, buying out north of University, to me, which would do probably more than some rain barrels and some other things, right? But then also, do we build a community center, and are we participants in it? And that's a lot of money. And now we're talking about $100,000 for tree and soil. I'm all for all of it, but someone has to pay it, okay? And so I'll say that to say, I'll pick the winners and losers when I see the list and the budget, and we
And
make it
the
work,
timeline, yeah.
right? Yeah.
No, that's good. Ted?
Yeah, I'm kind of with Mike.
Kind of.
Kind of. I never want to be 100% with Mike. That's never a good spot to be in. Handing out subsidies, we just got to be careful, right? And I want to understand the details and that cost benefit and all of that. I mean, at a high conceptual level, do I think it makes sense? Yeah. But I'm a bit hesitant when we start going down the, handing out money. So I just need to see more details.
Got it.
Pete, anything else on this topic?
That gives us the direction I believe we need. Stephanie, any questions that you have or anything we've missed?
No.
Okay.
Stephanie, thanks for your time and
Thank you.
for your work. Thank you. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Okay.
We'll have more fun later on this month and in September.
Yep. Good.
So I'll
Very
show
good.
you these financial models. We're looking forward to that.
Great discussion. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move to reports. Pete, let's start with you.
Sure. Let me stop sharing here real quick. Excellent. Thank you for that discussion. First, I've got some good news to share. You may remember last time we did the community or biannual resident survey, we were selected to apply for some awards because our scores among all the cities that participate were really high in some categories, just 2 categories last time. While I was on vacation, I got a great email from Polco and NRC, the group that runs our survey, indicating that we are eligible now to apply for the Voice of the People Award in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different categories compared to the 2 that we had last time we did that would have been the 2018 survey. So the 7 this year are in utilities, community design, inclusivity and engagement, foundations, natural environment, health and wellness, and safety. So we'll put a bunch of applications together and hopefully we can bring home some nice hardware for the city. It's nice to get this affirmation, especially when it's coming directly from residents. It's also nice to see how Clive stacks up to a lot of other cities that we admire and we look to for best practices as well. You may have seen today that the census numbers were released. Clive's number is at 18,601. And that is about, I think that was a 20%. Trying to remember.
Over the 10-year period, it's about 6.3 over 5. Since we did the special census, we're 17,057.
Right. That's just first blush there, seeing that number. More data will be coming out about unique census tracts. More data will be coming out about the gender and ethnicity and household income and all the other data that's collected as part of the census as well. So we look forward to diving into that. Good to be back in the lower 48 too. Alaska's a wonderful place. I recommend it.
Good to have you back safe and sound. Thanks, Pete.
Thank you, Mayor.
Eric.
Sure. The District 1 Citizens Advisory Committee had a open house at Lenan Park to the public. Items that we solicited public opinion one, including parks and open space, redeployment, circulation, and trail access, green infrastructure, housing, interpretation, and culture. So we received feedback from the public. If you'd like to take a look at that, go to www.creekclive.com.
That's pretty well attended, wasn't it?
I think
Even
so,
in the
yeah.
heat.
Even in the heat. Yeah, they held it outdoors. So even the heat. I was in Chicago, but I know they had some good numbers there.
Yeah.
You put your work in ahead of time.
I have put a lot of work in.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Eric. John. Great evening last night. I appreciate everybody's time. And tonight is really tying into that, I think, a lot. So very excited about the path that we're heading down for the future. So grateful for that, and a full afternoon tomorrow. So looking forward to that. Matt, we're starting at noon to 5 in here, right?
Right.
That's all I have right now. Susan, go
How
ahead.
about Battle of the Burbs?
Well, yeah. Yeah. Well, you brought it up. Go ahead. You start, and I'll come alongside. How about that?
All right. Well, Battle of the Burbs is the annual walk and race that NCMEC hosts in my neighborhood. So I've looked forward to it to a number of years, and we had good turnout from the city of Clive with the mayor and John and Eric able to attend. And we came really close to retaining that belt for the mayor, but West Des Moines edges us out at the last minute. So we got to work a little harder to get it back for next year.
Well, yeah, and you know, they had 500, just over 500 runners, participants, and it wasn't quite what they wanted. They were gunning for 700, 2 years ago. And COVID kind of put the slam on that. So I think that, NCMIC, what a great partner for us. All of the proceeds, go to our local community foundations that really have the thumb on the pulse of community betterment and what the needs are. And so I'm really grateful that that NCMIC acknowledges that. They spend a great deal of money, time, and resources to put this event on to benefit us, to benefit our communities. So just really, really grateful for that.
Mayor, that number is 58,000 that they raised for the various community foundations too.
Right, and that's and there may be more to that as well, because there's also some other individual fundraisers that each community is doing. And this year it was 5 communities, right, with Clive, Urbandale, West Des Moines, Waukee, and Johnston. Mayor Darrenfeld was there and ran the 5K.
Probably won the dang thing.
She was pretty. She said, I guess that was the first race she'd done in a couple of years. So, but she got right out there, and it was really just a first-class event, and was just so glad to have it right here in Clive. And Pete, and your help, and with the foundation, and with the committee, and everything else, just what a great success story. So, thank you for bringing that up.
Sure. Well, the only other thing I wanted to mention is the Clive Community Foundation, and the mayor's very involved in that too. But we're about to undertake a strategic planning effort, which I think will be good timing. We've had a transition in leadership from Scott being the president of the foundation, and Jane Fogg is now leading it. So with some transitions happening, and a real need to support the effort to fundraise for the Greenbelt Landing projects, I think that's a good time. There are a couple of openings on the foundation, so if you have recommendations for people to join, they'll welcome getting connected.
Very good. Mike.
I have nothing.
Matt. Oh, I skipped over Ted. Ted, do you have anything to share tonight?
I wondered if you were going to come to me. Just real quick, MPO exec met yesterday, or not yesterday, a couple days ago. And most of it was pretty boilerplate, but we did go over the Water Trails Build grant. Just as a reminder, that's a $25 million grant from Federal Highway. And basically there are 4 sub-agreements that are being used to manage and distribute that funding. You know, and they're broken down into construction and maintenance and things of that nature. And we spent a solid hour on going through those sub-agreements and making sure the MPO is indemnified and that they were properly set up, and a little bit too much details, but in any event, those are set up and should be moving forward so that that $25 million grant can be distributed and processed through. So, and then the last thing is there is a, I don't know if our staff is aware of this, but there's a disaster recovery grant from the state for the derecho. That's $250,000. And basically any community can apply for tree replacement. And it's basically $500 to $5,000 worth of trees that can be distributed out of this fund. And a community can request out of this fund more than once. So if we have trees at City Hall, for example, that could be one request, and then trees at Kemble Park can be another request. And again, the amount's going to be anywhere between $500 and $5,000 until that fund is depleted. They're anticipating that that will be replenished, but that's what it is here on the front end. So that's all I have.
Good. Thank you, Ted.
I've got great news for you, Councilmember Weaver. You approved that grant application at item W on your consent agenda.
Oh, perfect. Well done.
$5,000 we're going after.
Great segue to Matt.
All I have, Your Honor, is obviously we'll have the session tomorrow. Looking forward to that. And also a reminder on another project that Richard and his team and with the landscape architect, we're doing a kind of the first meeting, kind of walk-through meeting with the neighborhood in the Indian Hills Woods area on Tuesday. I'll include this in my weekly update on Tuesday at 6 p.m. starting on the 98th Street end, right? This is part of getting the surrounding residents involved with what the landscape is going to look when it all comes back, what we plant back, working with the landscape architect on that. So keeping that moving forward, and then you'll start to see some heavy work here as we get to the later part of the summer and the fall when the ground starts to firm up and doing work in the Indian Hills Woods. So that's all I have, Your Honor, unless there's any questions.
Questions for Matt, Council?
You gonna send that out, Matt, on when that walk is?
Yep, I will include it tomorrow. Yep.
Thank you, Matt. Before we wrap up, Joyce, I wondered if you would be so kind to elaborate on the 62 pages of property value assessments contests that we've received. Well, I've never seen 62 pages in 18 years.
No, it's just the application.
Okay.
that they process.
And they're asking for reductions of half or more in some of these cases.
Yeah, it'll drag on for up to a year. A lot of them are routine. Menards is an every year thing. Walgreens is an every year thing.
Willis is.
I don't remember Willis being.
That's a newer one. Some of these commercial properties hire firms that specialize in it, and then the firm gets a cut if they get it reduced.
And then there's another notice that comes. I should have probably peeled those out. If it's over a threshold, then they have another notice that they have to send you. So.
Well, I know you'll keep us informed and posted on judgments that come out of PAB on that. Thank you. Good. Council, anything else for the good of the order? Matthew, any other correspondence?
Got them all.
Okay, all 62 pages of it. Seeing nothing further, I'm going to adjourn us at 7:59.